if you have all these kids who get abused, you've also got a lot of perpetrators of abuse. And perpetrators of abuse can get into positions of extraordinary power in our society. So some of the people who are being punitive are probably themselves perpetrators of such behavior. And then there's a vast middle of people who don't have bad intent, but are ignorant and don't understand how they're behaving in ways that are harmful and hurtful to other people. And it's those people that we can change. We're not going to change the ones out here who are, you know, who don't have good intent. It's the people with good intent who are doing harmful things because they don't know any better. Those are the people we can change. I think people need more courage. There are risks, and you know, individual cases differ, but you know, and everybody has to decide what risks they're willing to take. But it is my strong impression that people are more afraid than they need to be.
So, Professor Freyd, thank you for speaking to us.
Looking forward to it.
So, my first question is, we've been seeing an increasing number of court cases in Greece, which involve allegations of child sexual abuse, usually supported by mothers who have been in conflictual relationships with the father of the child. And these women have been on the receiving end of variety of attacks to discredit the children's allegations. They mostly involve allegations of parental alienation, but they employ a number of strategies. I realize comment on cases that you're not specifically familiar with, but I'm referencing a pattern here. A pattern whereby the allegations of the child are deemed to be false memories, created sometimes through contact with a practitioner, psychologist, or a psychiatrist. And we have even seen cases where prosecutors, because they are the ones being by law regulate these kind of things, we have seen cases where these children are forced to undergo kind of treatment from court-appointed or prosecutor-appointed psychologist in order to correct those false memories of abuse. So I would like, since you have been working for decades in these fields, I would like your take on this pattern that I'm describing.
There's a similar pattern in the United States from what you're describing, and it's been the case for a long time. Maybe not that the thing you said about somebody having the job of interfering with the child the way you described, but certainly a great deal of dispute in the courtroom for parents in the situation you're describing, and often the courts award custody to the fathers who have been accused, and it's been very distressing for a lot of mothers who are trying to protect their children from further abuse. It's certainly possible, logically possible, that sometimes people are incorrect in their memories. Memory is not perfect. So you know, there has to be an opportunity for people to bring forward the facts and support the case. But it's my impression there's been a prejudice against the mothers and children who are alleging abuse, and the research evidence indicates false allegations are fairly rare, under 10% of allegations. So, you know, it seems it seems very tragic to me when abuse victims are not believed.
First of all, we know that a person of any age can have false memories. That's true, or memories that do not correspond, at least exactly, to an event in their past. Is this true?
Yes, certainly people can have errors in their memory. The term false memory is not well defined. By some people mean by that it's completely, totally false, as opposed to has some reality to it, but also some error. Most people's memories are not perfect, and they can get some details wrong. It's less common for people to believe something happened that had no basis in reality. It can happen, but that's less common than getting some of the details wrong.
Okay. Now, however, specifically in the context of abuse, child abuse, having a memory that concerns such a deep traumatic event and insisting on that memory, on the reality of that event, to such an extent that you are willing to break off very close relationships, very necessary relationships, such as relationships with your father, for example. We're seeing these children in these cases. We're following tens of cases at the moment where the children are adamant that they don't want to be near their fathers. They are scared of their fathers. Now, can this be? Is it possible, as side of the fathers is saying, can such an acute reaction, such a persistent reaction, be the result of a misguided memory?
Logically, it's possible. It's just unlikely. It's possible. People, the world's very big. There are a lot of people in it. There's probably been every kind of memory error you can imagine has occurred. So I would say it's logically possible, but there's no indication it's probable. It's not a likely reaction for a child to have to a parent who's safe and not abusive. But yeah, it's possible.
Why are we seeing a kind of phenomenon where when we have an allegation, it's almost like anything is more likely than the allegation itself being true? It's like the child may have false memories, a psychologist may have implanted these false memories, the mother might have implanted these false memories, the mother might be vindictive towards the father, the child might be vindictive towards the father because they are, I don't know, displeased that they didn't buy them something or whatever. Any one of these possibilities is deemed to be more likely than simply the fact that the child is telling the truth. Why is
people, so people don't want to believe that children get abused. And that if you think back, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, there was very little research documenting the high rates of child abuse in most societies, and certainly in Western societies. We now know that a sizable minority of children get abused in various ways. Sexual abuse is fairly common. And there's a concept called base rates, which is understanding the probability of something. You have to know how frequent that thing is in order to interpret evidence. And the base rate of child abuse is high, relatively high, and so when people say that they're abused, that would be a reason to entertain it's possible, given the base rates are pretty high. If you believe it's extremely, extremely, extremely rare, you might be more skeptical. And it's almost like people are 50 years out of date of the research. They don't think it happens when in fact it does happen. And I think people are very drawn to denial, because when you believe that there's been child abuse, that's very disturbing and upsetting. It means there's a societal responsibility to deal with it. And it's easier to believe it's not true. That's just easier for people to believe. And but the problem is that means that abused children don't get believed and don't get protected from further abuse.
Okay, so this situation, this climate that you are describing of basically underestimating the prevalence of child abuse sounds very convenient in order to build a defense strategy, as it were, for anyone who is accused. And we are seeing now increasingly, although I know in other countries it's not that recent a phenomenon. In Greece, we've been seeing it in the last 4 or 5 years or so. What we've seen is that a traditional defense for someone accused of a crime would be, I didn't do it because I have an alibi, I wasn't there, someone is lying. But now increasingly it's become this very, very stable artifice that alleges parental alienation, namely that the mother is intent on alienating the children from the father. And we're seeing this across the board. Now, obviously, there are cases where children become, let's say, they get in the middle of a divorce. But the idea that someone would make up an allegation of sexual abuse, or incidentally of spousal abuse, domestic abuse, in order to deny the children their father, his children, sounds a little bit far-fetched. I mean, this whole theory of parental alienation, and particularly its prevalence in the courts, I mean, how can we explain this?
I think, again, it's convenient for people to believe it. There's not much research supporting the idea of parental alienation as a widespread phenomenon. It can occur, as you noted. People can manipulate their children, but most of the research that looks at such possibilities finds it's rare, it's somewhat difficult to do. So, I think people's belief in it is not based on science or research, but on their societal and emotional needs to defend accused perpetrators and believe that the world is nicer than it really is.
Would you say that employing parental alienation as a strategy in such cases is an instance of DARVO?
I think it can be. So DARVO is a strategy that people accused of wrongdoing can use, and it's an acronym that stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. And if, let's say, a father is accused of sexual abuse of his child and then responds to that by accusing some other person, the child or the parent or a therapist, of making it up and then harming the father, that is, you know, a DARVO response there. So it can be an example of DARVO.
What have you found in your research with relation to the potential success of the DARVO strategy? I mean, can it be successful? Is it often successful?
Yes, so we've looked at that question in two ways. One is the effect of DARVO on the person who is the target of the DARVO. And what we have found is that a person who gets DARVO'd, so they've made a allegation and the response they get is DARVO, that such people are more likely to start blaming themselves, start doubting themselves, have more symptoms of post-traumatic stress. So it's harmful to the person who is receiving that response. And we also know when people blame themselves, they're more likely to fall silent. So there's reason to believe that DARVO is effective at silencing people when they are the recipients. There's another line of research, which is what's the effect of DARVO on the observers who are watching? And that would be maybe, you know, a judge or a jury in a courtroom or people reading the newspaper, etc. What we find there is that DARVO is effective at making the victim seem less credible. It is an effective strategy. The only hopeful note is we've also found that if we educate people about DARVO, it's less effective. So when people know the pattern, they're less likely to fall prey to that pattern.
You mentioned also before that people in general are likely to underestimate the prevalence of child sexual abuse. And one can't but think that in some cases, we're not just talking about people, we're talking about individuals who are in particular tasked with protecting the children. So child protection systems, welfare employees, prosecutors, psychologists, judges. Recently in Greece, a judge gave a seminar to junior judges and advised them that over 50% of child abuse allegations they're likely to encounter will be false. Now, we know this isn't true in the case of Greece because nobody has done that sort of research, so it's not around, it's not available anyway. But in countries where such research has been done, you mentioned before that the likelihood of false allegations is much lower than that, under 10%. Now, why are people whose job it is to protect children as uninformed as, say, the general public?
Yeah, it's kind of shocking and astonishing. And we have a concept we study in my laboratory and with my colleagues called institutional betrayal. And that's when institutions such as the judicial system or law enforcement or the medical system harm the people dependent upon them. And what you're describing is a really powerful example of institutional betrayal when what you said about that judge, because the information is false and it's very likely going to prejudice other judges against believing children who are telling about being abused. So the potential for harm is very, very high in that situation. You know, you're asking why, and I think in some sense that's a question for sociologists, but you know, again, I think it's more there. I mean, some people are are ignorant are honestly ignorant. They have learned something not true, and when they get educated, they change their viewpoint. They're just honestly ignorant, and such people are can be changed with education, and that some of that goes on. I mean, there used to be textbooks that said child abuse was extremely rare. And if people went to school long ago and that's what they read, they may still believe that. But there are other people that don't want to learn, don't want to accept the truth. And the position they're taking is serving a need they have to deny, whether it's because they are themselves perpetrators and they don't want to be held accountable, or they were victims in their own childhood and they don't want to deal with it, or they just don't want to have to deal with the feeling of responsibility that I think most adults feel a sense of responsibility when they understand that a particular child's been abused, or that a sizable proportion of children are being abused. Most of us feel some sense we need to do something about it. That's an uncomfortable feeling. And people will go to great lengths to avoid feeling responsible for other people's suffering. It's much easier to say that suffering's not real or not their responsibility.
In the case of institutional betrayal, as you describe it, this obviously means, just to explain it a little bit to our viewers, in the case of the situation we're dealing with in Greece, it means inadequate child protection. It means, particularly when it comes to the examination of children that allege sexual abuse, either untrained or very highly biased, prejudiced personnel talking to the child that's making the allegation, etc., etc. One of the things we often hear, at least here in Greece, when we mention these problems, is that the answer is more training, is that these people haven't been trained enough. But as you mentioned before, that's only some of the people that really lack information, and if they're given this information, they're likely to change. But there's other people that resist kind of information, actively resist it, let me put it this way. And what is more, what we're seeing in the court system and in the child protection system is a kind of punitive response towards the children and towards the women that support the children. Incidentally, also when children are not involved, towards women that allege domestic abuse. And this punitive response can take many forms, but more than likely, apart from the acquittal of the alleged perpetrator, it will lead to the awarding custody to the father. It may even lead to sentences against the mother, either for denying communication, visitation rights, all these sort of things. Now, I'm mentioning this because you said there are people that want to avoid their responsibility. Is there a chance that some people might be embracing their responsibility? They just think that they have a different kind of responsibility, to put women in their place, for example, or to put children in their place. Is this a matter of ideology?
I mean, it probably is for some people, but I would say it's closely related to sexism, and the general sense that women lie about being victims of crimes, especially about interpersonal crimes, is a myth that is endorsed or believed by people generally who also hold sexist, patriarchal viewpoints. So it can be part of an ideology, but I would say it's a problematic ideology. It's a harmful ideology, not based on what the research shows. I mean, the other thing I just think it's important to keep in mind is that if you have all these kids who get abused, you've also got a lot of perpetrators of abuse. And perpetrators of abuse can get into positions of extraordinary power in our society. So some of the people who are being punitive are probably themselves perpetrators of such behavior. And you can't from the outside tell which of those people are, one or another, but it's, it's just part of the reality out there. It's that if we've got, 20% of kids getting sexually abused in their childhood, there are a lot of perpetrators, especially because, while some perpetrators have many, many victims, a lot of perpetrators only are abusing inside their family. So, it's just a lot of people. And the other thing is there are people who are not perpetrators, but they were themselves abused as children and are really, really don't want to deal with that. They don't want to know it. They don't want to have that information brought into their mind, so they can get very, very angry at anyone who tries to confront that. So those people can be very motivated to deny the abuse of other people in order to not have to deal with their own history of abuse. And they can be, they can be dangerous people, not because they're perpetrators, but because they are fighting to keep information about their own past out of their awareness.
How can people, whether they are victims, whether they are those supporting victims, say mothers, who are also victims but also support the children, or maybe people that are wishing to support them, how can they resist this resistance within the system? What can we do?
Well, you're asking a really important question, and I don't know the answer to that. What I do believe is that at the least we need to educate everyone about what's going on, because at least in the United States, what we call family court, where these disputes occur, has been very problematic, and getting judges educated, getting the press educated, so when they report in the newspapers about it and so on, is at least a step in the direction of starting to reform the system. The other thing that helps is people who come together and work together, because individuals have a terrible time trying to confront the system. And what you're doing, bringing this information, into the world. I think that's where we have to start in changing any injustice like this.
Sorry to press the point, but this is also part of the reason that we very much wanted to have this interview with you, because you spend a large part of your career facing these issues, and we know that you're also very vocal about them. You don't just study them scientifically, but you also publicly advocate for these issues. And yes, I mean, I'm honest, I've come to see the realities of these things by reporting on them. And I'm trying to provide some information on these issues. But just the other day, I was confronted with a publication of a so-called scholarly article. It's got all the trappings of a scholarly article. It's called a review article in a well-respected magazine of one of the psychological societies here. But basically, what it does, it's a catalog, a review article, of every publication on parental alienation, mainly from the US. the usual suspects, the ones that also get cited in American court cases. Now, this next court case, this purportedly scholarly article will be cited by the defense of an alleged perpetrator, and the judge is obviously going to buy it. I have very little power compared to a consortium of psychiatrists, and there are usually the same names, something similar to what you encounter in the States, kind of cyclically citing each other in references, and making this sort of little group that is cited in every single court case as, you know, they are scientists. We are not. So I'm insisting a little bit on what we can do, because it seems to me that this takes a major reform. It's not just an issue of changing one or two people's minds. So again, what's the answer?
Well, I mean, you're asking a really hard question. And there are people, specifically on parental alienation as a topic. That's not a topic I've directly researched, but there are people in the United States who have written very helpful scholarly reviews showing how infrequent that is. And so one thing is just responding to the bad science with good science and finding those citations. So I can't do it off the top of my head, but I can send you some names after this interview. The other thing, I'm an educator and researcher, and I believe, perhaps because of that we need more, not only more education, but more research. And so one of the things I did was started a nonprofit organization to fund research and provide education related to institutional betrayal and DARVO, and also what I call institutional courage, which is kind of the good side of it all. And we have studies that we're funding that look at the court system and how children are treated in these ways. And it's not going to fix anything tomorrow. It takes a while, but I do think as we fund this research and it gets into the scientific journals, it gives the courts, people, advocates like you, more tools to, reform this system. But it's hard work and it takes time.
What about activism? What about publicity? Would you generally say that victims would do well to get together and speak out publicly rather than take a stance, sort of guarding themselves and being afraid that they're going to make things worse if they speak out?
Yes, I mean, I think people need more courage. There are risks, and individual cases differ, but and everybody has to decide what risks they're willing to take. But it is my strong impression that people are more afraid than they need to be. That activism, especially if they find, they don't try to do it alone, but they get other people, they do it as a group, that it usually benefits them and that gives them more power, not less. So I really think that activism can change the world and pay off. And one of the reasons I study institutional courage is trying to figure out why people are so afraid to speak the truth and speak out, and how to change that fear and get more courage, because we can change the world with courage. And I don't know why people are so afraid. I do want to say there are real risks, so it wouldn't take courage if there was no risk, but but people just so often, it's almost like they think they're still children and they don't have power and they're adults, but that, you know, they do have more power than they think they have very often. So the other thing that can make such a difference is the right kind of press coverage. So a documentary that gets a lot of attention, or, you know, a feature article in a major publication like a newspaper or magazine can really, you know, have a big impact. So activists, one reason lawsuits can help and activism can help is to get the attention of the press. And then the press has this access to, you know, to changing public opinion that can really be effective.
When a child makes allegations of abuse and it is not heard, or it is disbelieved, or it doesn't find justice in the court system, but furthermore is even punished in a way by being given to a potentially abusive parent, or being forced to see that parent despite their needs and desires. What does that do to a child? And what does that do to the adult this child will eventually become?
Well, unfortunately, it's very harmful. So we haven't done research with current children. We've done research with adults who had these experiences in childhood. And we know that when abuse always, you know, has some lasting consequences for people. Everybody's different. There's not a single model, but on average, people that get abused in their families have all sorts of ways that they're suffering more as adults. People can heal with a lot of work, but what we also know is that if you add institutional betrayal on top of the abuse, the harm goes up. So you can compare people that were abused in both cases, but one group also had this terrible reaction from the system. Those people on average are going to be doing worse. They're more likely to be suicidal, more likely to have post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, anxiety, I mean, everything we've looked at. So institutional betrayal adds harm on top of the interpersonal harm people have already experienced. And it's one of the reasons, you know, I put so much of my energy these days into promoting institutional courage, is to try to teach people in positions of leadership in institutions how to be less betraying. You know, they're the people that have bad intent, and they're out there. And then there are the people who have really good intent and who are highly educated, trying to save the world. And then there's a vast middle of people who don't have bad intent, but are ignorant and don't understand how they're behaving in ways that are harmful and hurtful to other people. And it's those people that we can change. We're not going to change the ones out here who are, you know, who don't have good intent. It's the people with good intent who are doing harmful things because they don't know any better. Those are the people we can change. And I think we can make huge, huge progress in a lot of ways by reaching such people. I'm always amazed at how ignorant individuals are about basic aspects of about what I'd call victim psychology, not understanding, for instance, that children who are abused may not tell anyone, or at least not for a long time. Not having basic understanding of that, then when a child does say, you know, I was abused 3 years ago, or whatever, they're not believed because other people that hear it don't understand that's kind of normal for there to be a delay like that. That we can change. That ignorance that leads to disbelief of the child, that hurts the child, we can change that by teaching people.
Well, it's very encouraging to hear you say that, because only recently we were talking to one mother that has been going through this usual pattern of court cases for a number of years now. And she was saying that if I knew what I know now when I first heard of my child's abuse, I'm not sure I would go through it again. Maybe I wouldn't just, and I've also heard in other cases, prosecutors, like in private, might tell you, you know, just don't do anything about it, you know, go for a consensual divorce if you can. This will allow you to keep the child as protected as possible. And, you know, just pray until the kid becomes 18 and is like out of the house. Like, don't go through with it, to such an extent that there is a slogan that the Greek authorities use in campaigns, particularly for domestic abuse, and says break the silence. It's copied from other countries as well, and it's like break the silence because it becomes almost a bit of a cruel joke in this situation. But you would still say that despite knowing all this, despite knowing what difficulties someone might face, they should still brave all this, and they still should go against the system.
Yeah, I don't want to say should, because every case is different, and people have to decide for themselves what they are willing, the risks they're willing to take. Sometimes the court system is not the best way to deal with a situation, because the court system may be so broken that it's not, you know, there are times when that's probably the right advice to people to avoid it. But if we want to change the world, then, you know, silence is not going to help. And figuring out ways to safely speak the truth are really extremely important. I don't want to make it the responsibility of victims to fix the system, though. I mean, it's hard enough being a victim, and a protective parent has to put their child's well-being first. And so it's almost like the rest of us who don't have children caught up in this terrible situation, it's the rest of us that need to fix this and need to speak up and need to, you know, take it on, because we're not trying to protect our own children. We're trying to protect all the children out there. And so it's a very different situation. So that's what I mean about this sense of responsibility, that if you understand the reality that is going on in the court systems, the family court systems, in the United States and Greece, and probably pretty much the whole Western world, and maybe the whole world, I don't know. But if you understand it and you really grasp how unfair it is to children, I don't know how you would just say, oh, I don't care. I mean, it makes at least makes me feel I have a responsibility to do something about it. And that's good. I mean, that sense of responsibility is good, but it is uncomfortable. And that's, you know, that's where I think we, though, can get the world to change, is getting all the people who are not in the middle of a custody dispute, who are not trying to protect their particular child, but all the rest of us fighting for reforming the system.
So thank you very much for speaking to us.
Yeah, well, I hope it's helpful, and I'm so glad you're doing the work that you're doing.